Hello, this video is a kind of experiment. I'm going to try to explain in English, and it's not my language. I hope I'm not going to commit many mistakes. One historical topic that is liberalism in the 19th century. This video is for high school students, and it's going to be a brief summary, and it's going to be mostly my opinion. Okay, before beginning, I want to make a point is that the liberalism in the 19th century, they were the heirs, the children of another cultural and political movement we have studied. That this movement is the Enlightenment, la Ilustración. The Enlightenment was born in France and was very typical of 18th century Europe. The main representatives were Voltaire, Diderot, Rousseau, and many other authors and writers. And liberals in the 19th century, in my opinion, they were the heirs of the Enlightenment. I'm not going to talk about political writers or thinkers or philosophers, just one. If you have to remember any of them, in my opinion, the most important one was John Stuart Mill, British. He was a kind of liberal progressive, and he lived in London in the middle of the 19th century. Okay, after that, I'm going to explain what I'm going to talk about. First, I'm going to talk about political liberalism. These liberals were focused and they were really interested in laws, rights, and political issues. Then I will talk about humanitarian liberalism, and these kind of liberals were focused in human dignity, mostly about the abolition of slavery. Then I will talk about the revolutionary liberalism, the liberals that were practicals and they were trying to topple the emperors, the kings, and the authoritarian kings and queens of the ancient regime. They were still in force in Europe. And I'm not going to talk because the topic is really complex, and I will use another video if I can do it. Is economic liberals. Economic liberals, obviously, they were focused in economic issues, and they defend freedom of trade and many other issues. Okay, after that, I will start with political liberalism. I will start with a sentence I like a lot. I think is from Voltaire. And the sentence says, I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. This is a very typical sentence. I don't know if the writer, if the author was Voltaire or not, but I think the principle they are talking about is really typical of liberalism. The liberals in the 19th century, they defended many ideas. One of them was freedom of thought. They were focused mostly in religious liberty, the right to have any religion or no religion at all. They also defend freedom of press, that today it is known as freedom of speech, the right to say almost any opinion, for example, the right to publish newspaper, the right they were against censorship, censura, and they were interested on liberty of speech and freedom of press, and obviously this right is really related with freedom of thought. Also, as the philosophers of the 18th century, they were against torture and slavery, and also they defend a concept, an idea that is called national sovereignty. Sovereignty is a really archaic name, and it can be the synonym is a power. The idea of the liberals of the 19th century is that the fundamental power, the basic power of society, belongs not to the king, royal sovereignty. The power of a state belongs to the people, the nation. Also, they defend separation of church and state. In many countries, religion and state and political issues were intermixed, they're mixed, and it was really difficult to differentiate between them. For example, in Spain, the Catholic Church was really close to the Prime Minister, to the King. In England, for example, the King was the head of the Anglican Church. The idea, the liberals, most of them, they were not anti-Christians, but they were secularists, and they defended separation of church and state. Also, they defended political freedom. If the power belongs to the nation and the nation is composed by free citizens, the idea is these citizens, they should be allowed to vote, suffrage, and they should choose the people who are going to rule them, to govern them. This idea of suffrage, in theory, if the nation is everyone, they should practice universal suffrage. That means that all males older than 18 years old in a country, men and female, they should be allowed to vote. But they were not brave enough, and they practiced this kind of suffrage. It's called census or limited suffrage. Census means list. The idea is only the people who were in the list, and the people who were in the list were male and rich people, people who pay taxes, were allowed to vote. With this system, census or limited suffrage, only 4, 5, 7, 10%, depending on the country, they were allowed to vote. It was a kind of not brave enough liberalism, because in theory, if they were liberals, everyone should be allowed to vote. Okay. The second version of liberalism, I define them as humanitarian liberalism. They were not so interested in political rights like freedom of expression, freedom of speech. They were against slavery. Slavery was legal in the 18th century, and many countries had slaves. The humanitarian liberals, they focus in human dignity. They thought that slavery was immoral and they should be abolished. The humanitarian liberals, most of them were Christians in the US mostly, and radicals like the Jacobins in the French Revolution. For example, Robespierre and the Jacobins during the French Revolution were the first one to abolish slavery in Haiti. The idea is slavery is immoral and they should be abolished, yes or yes. Okay, the first country to abolish slavery was UK. First, they abolished trade. Trade was not allowed between Africa and America, and then they abolished slavery totally. If you are optimist, if you think that human beings are good, you can think that slavery was abolished in the UK because of ethical and ideological reasons. Okay, maybe you are right. Also, if you are cynical, you can think that slaves were not longer profitable for slave owners in the UK. They suffered from many rebellions in Haiti and many other countries, and they changed slaves for cheap workers that they were much better and they didn't rebel. Okay, in any case, UK abolished slavery and many countries followed the lead, and slavery was forbidden in Europe, but not in the US. In the US, they have a huge problem because they have more than, I talk by memory, they had more than 2 million slaves in the country. Slave owners, obviously, they didn't want slavery to be abolished. And also, there were many people in the US, mostly in the north, but not only in the northern states, they were against slavery. One writer, feminist, and abolitionist, Harriet Beecher Stowe, I guess the pronunciation is right. She wrote a really popular book. It's called Uncle's Tom Cabin, and in this book was really popular, and she described the situation, the terrible conditions of slavery in the southern states. This book was really popular. Today it's not so popular, and there was a really big movement in the US to abolish slavery. Okay, what happened? In the northern states, many people were against slavery, but they didn't want to risk a civil war. Okay, slavery is wrong. It is immoral, but they didn't want a war with the South because they knew that the South were going to rebel. In the South, they wanted slavery to be legal, optional, obviously, but and also they didn't want any interference from Washington. They thought that Washington, the federal government, was trying to control them, and they didn't want any interference from Washington, and they were ready to fight. What happened? The one president, Republican, Abraham Lincoln, was chosen in 1861, and the people in the South, people were angry with the northern states. They thought that this president was going to abolish slavery. In practice, Abraham Lincoln, at the beginning, he wanted to abolish slavery slowly. He didn't want to abolish slavery at once. It didn't matter because a long and bloody war started, and the northern states and the southern states, they began the American Civil War. It was a terrible war. This is a picture of Abraham Lincoln. He was famous to be because he was not really handsome. He was kind of honest but ugly. He has a really famous sculpture in Washington, the Lincoln's Monument, and he was the U.S. president during the American Civil War. Okay, this is a map of the U.S. In the South. These states, Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, they allow slavery, and the northern states, they were against slavery. Okay, the war was really bloody. I'm not going to talk about the war, but at the end, the northern states won because they have a superior industrial capacity. They were most prosperous. They received migrants from Europe, mostly Irish, and the northern states, they won the American Civil War. Okay, they won the Civil War, and at the end, they abolished slavery. But in the southern states, they passed the Jim Crow laws. The idea in the South, they were kind of tricky, and they made laws to make black people separated from white people. The Jim Crow laws, they created what is called segregation. Whites should be in one school, the black people in another school. Have different hotels, different trains, different buses. Segregation was still in force until the 20th century. Okay, now I'm going to talk about revolutionary liberalism. One thing, one issue is talking about rights. Another thing is to make a revolution and to topple and to depose a king, because the kings were not happy with liberalism and they defended conservative views, reactionary views. The kings, obviously, many of them, except in the UK, they defended absolutism. Okay, there were many liberal revolutions in the 19th century. The first one, the most important, was in Spain. The liberals, the soldiers that were going to America to fight the rebels against Spain, because the American colonies, the Spanish American colonies, they have rebelled against the Spanish monarchy. They decided not going to America. They were not happy with that, and they created a liberal regime in Spain. The word liberal is in fact a Spanish word, liberalismo. The idea, the kings were not happy, and they used the Holy Alliance. It was a international treaty, and they sent an army to Spain, and they defeated the liberals in Spain. Also in Russia, in St. Petersburg in 1825, it took place the Decembrist Revolution. The people in the army, many people were liberals and they were not happy with the autocratic government of the Tsars. And they make a revolution in St. Petersburg and they also failed. Many of them were sent to Siberia, to Irkutsk, and their houses are still there. And in 1830, the revolution was not only in one country, it was in many countries. It can be in many countries. It can be defined as a wave. The most important revolution, liberal revolution, was in Paris, the French Revolution. In this revolution, the painter Delacroix painting the liberty guiding the people, the really famous painting. And in this revolution, in 1930, the Bourbons were finally deposed and they never came back again to France. And also, the most important revolution was the 1848, the springtime of peoples. In this revolution was kind of different. It was also a wave. There were revolutions in Vienna, in Berlin, in Paris, in Hungary. It was a really a European revolution. And in this revolution, liberals, nationalists, and workers, socialists, they worked together for deposing the kings. There were more factors, and this revolution, this wave, the springtime of peoples, was the most famous one. Okay, what happened in this revolution? At the end, the kings returned to power. It was a kind of failure, but several things happened. First, conservative, the kings, many of them, many conservative people, they thought that some values, some political rights of liberals were not wrong. They adopted values of the liberalism. Simultaneously, liberals, the more conservative liberals, became conservative, and an alliance was created between conservatives and liberals. An idea in this moment, liberals became like many of them, not all of them, became conservative. And now the workers and socialist trade unions and movements took the lead of social change, and now they were the leaders of the revolutions. Okay, I finished with liberalism, with the three trends: political liberalism, humanitarian liberalism, and practical liberalism. Now I'm going to talk about the bourgeois. Bourgeois is a French word, and these people, this social class, were the leaders of liberal revolution. Who were the bourgeois? Karl Marx make a definition. I'm not going to use that. I'm going to make my own definition. Maybe Karl Marx is right. I'm going to make my own, and I think it's more clear. Bourgeois, in simple terms, is a social class. They were middle classes, rich people, traders, lawyers, and these bourgeois, they share common values. For example, they believe that education was really important. Literacy, education for men and for women, they believe in that. They also believe in merit, meritocracy, and freedom. In theory, if you work hard, you are going to have success in life. They also were really obsessed with cleanliness and decency, the clothing, the manners. They have to be polite with everyone, and also they were kind of sexist. The typical bourgeois in family, the women should be attending home. They were supposed to be dedicated to home affairs, to be ángel del hogar in Spanish, and the women, educated and literate, they were supposed to take care of the home affairs, and the men, they were supposed to take care of the more political and to vote and so on and etc. And this kind of bourgeois, many of them were romantic and idealistic. The more conservative liberals were religious, and the more conservative, the more progressive liberals, they were kind of agnostic or secularists, or they were not anti-religion, but they believe in separation of church and state. Okay. Why the revolutions of the 19th century, they were led by these bourgeois? These revolutionaries were young, liberal, bourgeois, and they wanted to transform the world. They wanted to change from authoritarian regimes, typical of the ancient regime, they want to change their regimes to liberal monarchies. And why did they win? Why they were successful? I think in two reasons. First, the ancient regime, the kings were not ready. They didn't have a proper police force. They didn't know how to fight insurgency. They didn't know how to fight rebels. And many revolutions they were successful because the police didn't exist. Also, because in the armies, the army officers, the low ranks like sergeants, lieutenants, captains, they were liberals, and the army officers and the 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 bourgeois, they were allies and they fought the kings, and many kings were deposed because the police was not ready and because the bourgeois and the army officers they worked together. Okay, I think this is everything. I think I expect my English was not too bad, and that's all. Thank you.